Welcome, everyone. We're so excited everyone can be here with us. We have a really fantastic program lined up today in honor of Yom Yerushalayim. And we want to go ahead and get started so that we can use all of our time for our three guests who we have with us. And so just to introduce the program and what's happening. So first of all, my name is Michael Emerson. I work at Pardes. I'm our Director of Special Projects, and I'm excited to host this today in collaboration with the CE team, with Deborah, who you all know and who's wonderful and helped put this together. Today's event is sponsored by Barbara Osband and her children, Yardeana, Michael, Noam, and David, in memory of Dr. Michael Evan Osband, Zichrono Livracha, who I'm sure you'll learn more about very shortly. But we're going to start with a introduction and dvar Torah from Yardeana. And just to tell you 1 second about her, Yardeana is the Assistant Clinical Professor of Pediatrics at New York Medical College. She's taught in many schools, synagogues, and has been a scholar in residence in many communities. She lectures on Tanakh, Halakha, Talmud, and she's the co-host of a recent very popular podcast called Talking Talmud about Daf Yomi. She also serves on the board of ORA and the Riverdale Minyan, and is a founder of the Orthodox Leadership Project. She helped start with her family the Michael Osband Senior Swab Campaign with Gift of Life, and she currently resides in New York with her husband, David, who will also be presenting soon, and their children. So please welcome Yardeana Osband to start us off and to give us an opening dvar Torah.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction. And thank you for Pardes for giving our family the opportunity to do something for Yom Yerushalayim today, especially when some of us do not have the zechut to be there with those of you who are there. And I also want to thank our dear friends, Deborah and Jay Salomon for helping to arrange this. And always being very special and dear friends to our family. And I recognize many names also on the Zoom. So thank you everybody for joining us. I just wanted to share Gemara from Bava Batra on Amud Hey, Amud Bet, where there's a beautiful discussion about what sort of the third Yerushalayim of the future is going to look like. What Yerushalayim is going to look like, not necessarily even when the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt, although I'm sure that's a little bit what they're talking about here, but it really just keeps talking about sort of like what the third Yerushalayim is going to look like. And the Gemara begins as follows: V'amar Rabba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahagbiya et Yerushalayim shalosh parsot lamala. So Rabba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that in the future, Hashem will raise Yerushalayim up 3 parsot. It'll be raised 3 parsot high. And how do they know this? They quote a pasuk from Zedekiah, Shenamar, V'rama v'yashva tachtecha, right? That Yerushalayim will be lifted up and inhabited in its place. My tachtecha, what does it mean in its place? It means equivalent to its place, equivalent to what Yerushalayim was measured out then. Ketachtecha. Umimai daha tachtecha, tlata parse have. And so how do we know how big Yerushalayim actually was? And so the Gemara answers here that it was actually 3 square parsaot. That was the actual size of Yerushalayim. Amar Rabba, and then Rabba adds here, Amar li haku sava lididi chazi li Yerushalayim kamate utlata parse have. So Rabba says, and remember, Rabba's living in Bavel, probably never had the zechut to actually go and see Yerushalayim. And he says, a certain elder told me that I saw the initial Yerushalayim, right? This person saw what the original Yerushalayim looked like. And this is exactly how big Yerushalayim, that Yerushalayim was exactly this 3 parsaot. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead here. And then the Gemara gets into a very interesting discussion based on 4 psukim in Zechariah, Perek Bet, psukim Hey through Chet, verses, so chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. And they give a very, very interesting read to these psukim. So Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, Bikesha Kadosh Baruch Hu, Latet et Yerushalayim b'midah. So Rabbi Chanina bar Papa says something very interesting, that Hashem wanted to give a set measure for Yerushalayim. The Yerushalayim, unlike other cities, which we'll talk about in a second, in the second part of this Gemara, right? Which, they can sort of grow, right? The borders can sort of creep. When Hashem designated what Yerushalayim was going to look like as a city, it had a midah, it had a set measure. And this is based on two psukim that appear in Zechariah, psukim that I just mentioned, where Zechariah says the following, Zechariah looks up, he's having this vision, and he sees a man holding a chevel midah, which was like a measuring stick, basically. Right? And so he said, Zechariah says to this man, where are you going? And the man replies, Vayomer Elai, la'amod at Yerushalayim. I'm going to measure Yerushalayim. We wrote kama rachba v'kama archa, to see how long and how wide Yerushalayim is. So based on these psukim, Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa says, we see that Yerushalayim had a very set measure. Then the Gemara says, but the Gemara continues with this Agadata and says the following. Amru malachei hasharet lifnei kadosh baruch hu. So the angels come to Hashem and say the following: Ribono shel harbe krachim barata be'olamecha shel umot ha'olam. Right? You, Hashem, you have created many cities in this world for many nations. And what? V'lo natata midat archan umitat rachban. And they don't have a set measurement. They don't have a set length and they don't have a set width. They're allowed to grow and to expand and be as big as you would like them to be. Yerushalayim sheshimcha betocha umitashacha betocha v'tzadikim betocha ata notein ba'midah. So they said, we don't understand, but Yerushalayim, which has your name, which has your mikdash, which has tzadikim in it, how is it that it could have an actual set measurement, right? Basically, what the angels are saying is that you're limiting Yerushalayim. How could you say that Yerushalayim isn't allowed to grow, that Yerushalayim is not allowed to expand? And so therefore it says Vayomer, and now they quote these last two psukim that follow in Zechariah, V'hinei hamalach hadover biyotze, right? So an angel walks towards Zechariah, umalach acher yotzei likrato, and another angel comes forward to also meet Zechariah. And what does the angel say? Vayomer elav, and the angel says, Rutz daber el hanar halaz, run to that young man and tell him, meaning the person who's doing the measuring, right? Prazot teshev Yerushalayim me'rov adam ubehema betocha. Yerushalayim will be peopled as a city without walls, and so many men and cattle it contains. That in other words, in the future, Yerushalayim, which we always associate with and define as being a walled city, in the future, in this third Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim is not going to have any walls. Its measurements, it's going to be allowed to grow the way that any normal city is in the world. And that's what the prophecy of Zechariah promises us. And then finally, the Gemara concludes by saying, Amar Reish Lakish, right? Atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahusif al Yerushalayim, elef tefet ginoot, elef kefel migdalim, elef litzoye briniyot, elef ushne shilo, tot farot, v'chol achad v'achad have ketzipurei b'shalvata. So Reish Lakish says that in the future, Hashem will add to Jerusalem 1,000 times the value of a tefach of gardens. So in other words, there will be thousands of gardens that are added, 1,000 kelefs of towers, 1,000 litosei of different like types of fortifications, and 1,002 times the value of Shiloh of small houses. So in other words, that eventually Yerushalayim is going to grow and grow, and it's going to be filled with gardens and towers and homes. And it finally concludes by saying each and every one of these additions will be like the great city of Tzipori, right? Which again, remember, Tzipori was really the city of the Tanaim, and that was the city that they all knew well and was a very prosperous city. That's how prosperous Yerushalayim is going to be. So I found this Gemara very much reminded me of my father, who really loved Yerushalayim. Very strange that he also passed away on Yerushalayim. But those of you who know him know that really it was very, very appropriate. And I want to say two things about that. One of my father's favorite activities was walking the Chomot. And that to me is the defined Yerushalayim, right? It's the Yerushalayim that we know, the measured Yerushalayim of the 3 parsaot. The exactly, when you go through that walls, that's the Yerushalayim of old. But he also was very blessed to live in a generation that we also have the zechut to live in today, right? Where we see the Yerushalayim outside of the walls. We see the Yerushalayim that has no measurement anymore. Where we see the amazing building and the growth of this beautiful city. And, it even goes as far as Ramot, right? We can't even describe it anymore as just being this 3 parsot. In a way, I think we've had the zechut to live in this time of the Gemara that the Gemara is describing, of sort of this Yerushalayim in the future that is not bound by midah, that is not bound by measurement. And so I'd like to think that we sort of see, my father loved both parts of Yerushalayim, the midah part, the measure part, and the growth of Yerushalayim. And, for all of you who have the zechut to actually be learning with us today and watching this from Yerushalayim, and those of us who only have the zechut to see pictures, that each of us appreciate these 2 different aspects of Yerushalayim. What is our old Yerushalayim that Hashem blessed us with, and this new Yerushalayim that has boundless potential and boundless growth if we only dream big. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and now I will hand it off to David.
All right, thank you very much, Yardeana. That was beautiful. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having Jay and Deborah. Thank you for putting this together. A shout out, of course, to my mother-in-law, Barbara Osband, who is here and listening, enjoying the nachas of her children, I guess. Anyway, I thought I'd do a few songs for Yerushalayim. Here we go. Sisu et Yerushalayim gilu ba kolo aveha Sisu et Yerushalayim gilu ba kolo aveha. Sing along if you want, wherever you are. Sisu et Yerushalayim gilu ba kolo aveha Sisu et Yerushalayim gilu ba kolo aveha. Achamotayich ir David ykareti shomrim kol hayom vechol halayla. Amotayich ir David ykareti shomrim kol hayom vechol halayla. La 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 la. Hay la 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Achamotayich Yerushalayim ykareti shomrim kol hayom vechol halayla. Achamotayich Yerushalayim ykareti shomrim kol hayom vechol halayla. Yerushalayim 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 Achamotayich Yerushalayim Kareti shomrim kol hayom vechol halayla. Achamotayich Yerushalayim Kareti shomrim kol hayom vechol halayla. Yerushalayim Yerushalayim Yerushalayim. Shana haba l'shana haba l'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Shana haba l'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim habenuya. Hay l'shana haba b'Yerushalayim habenuya. Hay l'shana haba b'Yerushalayim habenuya. Hay l'shana haba b'Yerushalayim habenuya. Chag Sameach, everybody. So happy to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to David and to Yardeana superstar tag team. Thank you both and your family for being part of this. We're so appreciative. And thanks for enlivening the day with some beautiful words of Torah about the city that is, as Yardeana pointed out, if you can count from my mirpeset, the amount of construction cranes that are constantly going up every day and expanding the city and growing the city. It's definitely true. And David, thank you for adding some music and some spirit to our day. So really very much we appreciate that. And now I'm going to pass the mic, the Zoom, to our incredible tour guide, Shulie Mishkin.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. First of all, it's so nice to see Yardeana and David, who gave me beautiful hospitality in Riverdale, and it's great to see you, and Barbara. And we're going to do something not quite as rousing as David singing. I'm sorry. I just, you don't want to hear me sing. But we are going to explore a little bit of Yerushalayim. And I encourage everybody who has questions to please put them in the chat. We'll leave a little time at the end if there are questions or comments. We are going to explore a neighborhood that is not the classic neighborhood that we think of when we think of Yom Yerushalayim. It's not the old city, it's not Har HaZeitim, but it is a fascinating neighborhood, and it does have a Yom Yerushalayim connection, and that's the neighborhood that's called Derech Shechem, okay? Nablus Road, Shechem Road, as we're going to see in the map, okay? It leads out from Damascus Gate, from Shar Shechem, going towards the north, and it's a fascinating neighborhood for a bunch of different reasons, okay? In various time periods, it's outside, most of the time periods, it's outside the walls of the old city, right? Yardeana was telling us about the contained Jerusalem and the expanded Jerusalem. Most of the time, this was outside the walls of the old city, and that means that it has a lot of different themes that are fascinating for us. What happens outside the walls, right? This is the place of burial. This is the place where the city roads are, okay? And it's also connected to the other idea that Yardeana said about expanding the city. How does the city grow in the 19th century? So we are going to really be going from First Temple times, all the way up to 1967. We could even, talk a little bit about today, because this neighborhood leads right into the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, which has unfortunately been in the news a lot in the last few days. I'm not going to do much in the way of politics, but this is the area, we're right near the area that we're talking about here. So we're going to deal with burial. We're going to deal with the city growing and expanding. We're going to deal with where are the walls of the city. As you can see in the picture that I chose here for the beginning, this is an area that has been, in recent times at least, a war zone. And that's going to be really our 1967 connection, okay? But also this idea that Europe in Jerusalem, right? There's a great quote, Simon Sebag Montefiore wrote a biography of Jerusalem, he calls it. And he says that the growing new city was so architecturally eclectic that today Jerusalem has houses and entire suburbs that look as if they belong anywhere other than in the Middle East. Okay? And we're going to see that as we go along. And anybody who's wandered down this street and suddenly said, wait a second, what happened? Did I suddenly, unconsciously get on a plane and end up in Cambridge, or somehow, maybe made my way to Germany? That's what we're going to see as we go along here. Okay. So let's continue. Let's understand where we are. Okay, one of the things that I think is a very powerful feeling, less so when you're doing this on Zoom. You will have to come to Israel, or if you're in Israel, you have to come and join me, and we'll do this in real life. Okay, people say, oh, Shar Shechem, Damascus Gate, Derech Shechem, that's such a dangerous area. Unfortunately, in the last few days, it has been, but in most of the time, this is a very normal area. And one of the things that I always find fascinating is when you walk, this is literally to begin this tour, you walk 5 minutes from City Hall, okay? City Hall, Jaffa Road, Jaffa Gate, it's literally a 5-minute walk away. And the other thing is that a block away from Derech Shechem is the light rail, right? Anybody who's been in Jerusalem in the last 10 years or so, chances are good that you've ridden on the light rail. And this is the light rail station of Shar Shechem, Damascus Gate, or as it's called in Arabic, Bab al-Amud. We'll talk about what that means when we get to Shar Shechem in a minute. And from here, the train kind of veers north and goes towards mostly Jewish neighborhoods, right? Goes towards the areas of Shimon HaTzadik and Ramat Eshkol, and then ultimately out towards Beit Hanina, Arab neighborhood, Pisgat Ze'ev, but it's very, very close to this place that we say, oh, we don't go there. That's in the Arab box, right? Not in the Jewish box. But really, Jerusalem, Ir Shechubra Yachdav, it's a city that's connected. You really cannot separate out the strands of the city one from the other. And it's very, very close to places that we're very comfortable walking, and we should feel comfortable walking everywhere. So let's understand where we are. Okay, so let's just take a look here for a second. Right, we are right here by, well, first of all, one thing to notice, and we'll talk about this, is that as you go along Derech Shechem, what does it say here, right, on our nice Google Maps? Route 60. Okay, if you've driven around Jerusalem, right, if you've come out to Gush Etzion, or if you've gone north towards Beit El or Shiloh, you have driven on Route 60. Much of Route 60 is what was at one point called Derech Avot, the path of the patriarchs, the mountain road that goes along the ridge of the mountain from Beersheba to Hebron to Beit Lechem, Jerusalem, Beit El, Shiloh, Shechem. Okay, and this mountain road kind of skirts around Jerusalem, right? It doesn't really go through Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a little bit off to the side, but this is important. And we're going to see a map in a minute from the Jordanian times between 48 and 67, where Derech Shechem, right, Nablus Road, connects up to the road to Ramallah, because that's exactly what's happening here. This is a road going north. We are going to be starting here by SAR Shechem, right, by Damascus Gate, and making our way really a very, very short distance, right, less than a kilometer, but we're going to find so many exciting things along the way, okay, including the Schmidt College, including the Garden Tomb, including the American colony, and other things along the way, the walls from Bayit Sheni times, tombs from Bayit Rishon times, right, all different kinds of things. And again, just to touch on the news, this is the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, okay, right next to Shimon HaTzadik. The disputed areas, are they Jewish? Are they Arab? Are they Palestinian? Who owns them? Who's renting them? Right. Like I said, we won't go into it too deeply, but this is where we are. Okay. Obviously, the old city coming down from here, Jaffa Gate, right, going around towards the east. And this is Har HaZeitim, the Mount of Olives, right over here. Okay. Now that I've colored all over my map, let's move on and understand a little bit more. The other thing that's interesting, if you look at this old map, right, I'm giving a tour later today. It's a very Jerusalem Day kind of theme on the divided city. What did the city look like between 48 and 67, when the east side of it was in the country of Jordan and the west side of it was in the country of Israel, right? And you had no man's land in the middle. And obviously the whole old city, except for Mount Zion, was under Jordanian control. But one of the fascinating things is if you look at maps from those days, from 48 to 67, the Jordanian maps essentially ignore that there's a country called Israel, right? There's nothing on this side of the map. What does it say? Occupied territory of Jerusalem. And the Israeli maps do the same thing. They have all the details on the Israeli side and very little on the Jordanian side. So it's kind of, they're living so close together, but basically ignoring each other. But this is a map from the Jordanian period. And just what I was pointing out to you is that here we are coming out of Damascus Gate and going here on Nablus Road, which eventually turns into the road to Ramallah. Okay, so that's important as well. Mount Scopus up here, which was under Israeli control, but that's a tour for another time. Okay, we're going to come back to the roads here, but see how close we are to Israel, right? To Israel between 48 and 67. Okay, now let's start. We're going to go back to earlier times, but let's start towards the end of the story. Okay, when do people start moving outside the walls of the old city? Why do they move and where do they go? Okay, so we are going to encounter on our walk along Derech Shechem, our virtual walk, we're mostly going to encounter Christian building and Muslim building, right? Many of us are familiar with the Jews breaking out of the old city walls, and that's of course the picture on the right here, beautiful Mishkinot Sha'ananim, the neighborhood that today most of us call Yamin Moshe, but the original neighbor is Mishkinot Sha'ananim. and other neighborhoods built in those early years, mid-19th century, breaking out of the walls of Jerusalem, Mea Shearim, Nachlat Shiv'ah, right? Different neighborhoods. But we also have Christians who move outside of the walls and Muslims who move outside of the walls. And most of Derech Shechem is Christians and a little bit of Muslims. But let's understand, let's take a step backwards for a minute. Why do these groups move outside the walls? So each group is moving for different reasons. Okay? The Jews are the easiest to understand. If we look at numbers, just at the population numbers, in the year 1800, there are 2,000 Jews in Jerusalem, there are 3,000 Christians, and there are 4,000 Muslims. The Jews are the smallest group. In general, Jerusalem is a tiny little hamlet. If we jump a century forward to 1914, okay, the Muslims have tripled in size. They've gone from 4,000 people to 12,000 people. The Christians have quadrupled in size. They've gone from 3,000 people to 13,000 people. The Jews have gone from 2,000 population to 45,000 people. Okay, that's an incredible increase. Where are all those people going to go? And this is for a lot of different reasons. Life conditions in the city got better. It was easier to live. The birth rate and the death rate both improved. But obviously, the main idea is Zionism. More Jews start pouring into the land of Israel. Where are they going to go? There's not enough room for them in the Old City. The Old City is desperately overcrowded. So Jews, with the pioneering Moses Montefiore, they start to break out of the walls. They start to build new neighborhoods. What are they looking for? They're looking for housing. They just need physical places to live. Okay, so they are building residential neighborhoods. They're very practical. The houses are small. Everything is very, just how can we fit as many people in as a compact a space as possible. So that's the Jews. The Christians, different story. We don't have a huge influx of Christians. They don't have a housing crisis, but the Christians are having a different kind of crisis. What's going on? The end of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire is falling apart. Everybody knows the Ottoman Empire is falling apart, right? It's known as the sick man of Europe. And all the European powers are hanging out outside the door, just waiting, right? Who's going to grab it? Who's going to grab this part of the Ottoman Empire? Who's going to grab that part of the Ottoman Empire? And of course, what's a big prize? Not because we have so much oil or anything else, but because of the significance for Christianity, the land of Israel. So everybody wants to be here and everybody wants to build something that's bigger than the other European powers. So anybody, this is what I was quoting to you from Montefiore, right? Anybody who's walked around Jerusalem, downtown Jerusalem, knows that each European power comes along and builds something bigger and fancier and more elaborate than its neighbors, right? The first ones are the Russians, the Russian compound, that huge complex of buildings right outside of Jaffa Gate. The Italians and the Americans are the last ones, the Italians with the Italian hospital, the Americans with the YMCA. In between, the British, the Germans, the French, right? Everybody comes along and wants to build something impressive and fabulous. And also, we're going to see there's not a little bit of missionizing to the Jews and to the Muslims. Okay, so Jews need places to live. Christians need places to show their power. What about Muslims? Okay, and that's the house that you see here on the left. This is one of the very elaborate and beautiful villas that are built by the wealthy Arab families outside of the old city. Okay, this is what's known as the Orient House. We're going to talk about it in a little while, right? Built by the Husseini family. Okay, but there are a lot of houses like this. The Muslims don't have a population explosion. They don't have a lot of foreign money coming in. They don't really need to prove anything to anyone. But there are some families that are becoming more wealthy, and there always have been for centuries these very important, significant Muslim families in Jerusalem, the Husseinis, the Nashashibis, the Nusebes, the Dajanis, who have essentially controlled everything in the city. And they don't want to live in some cramped little apartment in the Muslim quarter. They want to have a space where they can build a family compound and spread out and show their status and their wealth and their power. So they also want to build something, but they're not building building residential neighborhoods. They're not building institutions. They're building homes, very elaborate homes, but homes as well. So like I said, what we are going to see as we are traveling along Derech Shechem, we are not going to see Jewish neighborhoods because the Jews move out more to the west, more to the area near Jaffa Gate, but we are going to see the Christian institutions, okay, that move out over here to the north, and the Muslim villas. So that's what we're going to keep our eyes open for. But first, let's start with the gate. I can't start with anything if we can't talk about Damascus Road or Nablus Road without talking about Damascus Gate. What's with all the names, by the way? Damascus Road, Nablus Road, Shechem Road. All of them essentially mean the road that goes to the north, because that's where this gate is leading to, just like Jaffa Gate. Jaffa Road, the road that goes to the west, ultimately ending up in Jaffa. This is the road that's ultimately going to end up either in Shechem, or if you keep on going and you go a little bit to the east, right, you're going to end up in Damascus, right? So this has always been a central gate of the old city. It's actually the most beautiful of all the gates. You can see in this picture, these pictures from the 19th century, how impressive it is with all the, I don't know what they're called, crenellations, right? All this fancy stuff on the top. Today, as you've seen, if you've turned into the news the past few nights, you cannot have avoided seeing pictures of Damascus Gate, because that's where a lot of the conflict was going on. Today, Israel built like a stepped plaza going down and made it into like a kind of a gathering place. But even in the 19th century, which is when these pictures are from, you can see that it's this big, beautiful space, very well decorated. And the other picture I think is even more interesting picture. This picture on the left of the outside of Damascus Gate, we have quite a few versions of it. But the picture on the right, we have fewer, and that's the inside, right? That's after you've gone into the gate. You are the viewer. You're standing inside the old city looking toward the gate. And both these pictures are fascinating because of how little has changed, right? How little has changed. The city, the bones of the city, the structure of the city has stayed the same over centuries. And that goes back. Where does it begin? It begins with Roman times, okay? This area in the north of the city, First Temple times, this is outside the city. Most of Second Temple times, outside the city. Only toward the end of Second Temple times, 2,000 years ago, is this area by the Damascus Gate incorporated into the city, right? But that's only really at the very end. And when the Second Temple is destroyed, the Romans come here, right? 65 years after the temple is destroyed, the Romans decide they're going to build a new city in Jerusalem, a pagan city called Aelia Capitolina. Whether this is the cause of the Bar Kokhba revolt or a result of the Bar Kokhba revolt, we're not going to go into that right now. But one of the centerpieces of this new Roman city are triumphal arches. Okay, what the Romans do is they build 4 freestanding triumphal arches. Think of the Arch of Titus in Rome. Similar idea, right? An arch that's meant to symbolize we are here, we are in charge, we are in power. And they build one of these arches. One of them is, we found pieces on the Via Dolorosa inside the Muslim quarter. One of these arches we found here by SAR Academy, and the story is actually a great story, because if you take a look, right, at this picture up here, this is today's entrance into SAR Academy, right? There's this nice little bridge here. But in the 70s, when Israel made that nice big plaza, they excavated. And what did they find under today's SAR Academy? They found a piece of the Roman SAR Academy, right? It's there, it's intact, it's perfect. What did it originally look like? Take a look at the picture on the right. It was originally a triple arch. Now, this is showing you from later when the walls are rebuilt. But when this is built by the Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century of the Common Era, it's a freestanding arch, okay? And you went into the city through the arch. And this is where we get to, remember we said, what's the name of Damascus Gate in Arabic? Bab al-Amud. Bab, if you've learned a little Gemara, you know, Baba Kama, Baba Batra. A bab is a gate, right? Al-Amud of the pillar. This is the gate of the pillar. See the pillar here? Right? Hadrian put up a pillar with a bust of himself on top. Okay, so you would go in through Hadrian's triumphal arch. Once you're inside, you're in this big open plaza, a forum, where what are you looking at? You're looking at the Emperor Hadrian. Now, the fascinating thing about this is that here we are 1800 years later. Okay, the Amud is long gone. There is no more pillar. Okay, but the gate is still called the Gate of the Pillar. That historical memory has stayed. And not only that, but when you come into Shechem, right, it doesn't look exactly like this, right? The Romans built this nice semicircular forum with the cardo leading out, right, and another secondary cardo. It doesn't look exactly like this, but it looks pretty similar. When you come into Damascus Gate, there's a big open area. There's usually like some ladies from the countryside who are sitting there selling fresh grape leaves or whatever else is growing. And then you walk a little further in and you get to those main streets. So what the Romans did is that 1800 years ago, they actually created a skeleton of the city that is still around today, which is really kind of extraordinary when you think about that. So that's our Shar Shechem. What's the quote here? Evil shall come from the north. Mitzafon tipatach hara'ah. This is what the prophet Jeremiah says in First Temple times. Because two reasons. Who's the enemy in the prophet Jeremiah's time? The Babylonians. They're coming from the north. But even more so, if you look at a topographical map of Jerusalem, you will see that there are valleys protecting the east, the west, and the south of the city. There is no valley protecting the north. So any smart conqueror is going to come in from the north, and that's what the Babylonians do, and that's what the Romans do, right? Everybody comes in from the north. Oh, I thought I could open my window and get air, but it seems I cannot. Okay, moving on. All right, we're going to get on to Derech Shechem in a minute, but just one more thing that's right next to it that's just a fascinating place to go and see. Okay, literally a couple of meters away from Shar Shechem is a massive underground cave. Okay, if you go to it, you'll see it has different names. Okay, in Hebrew, it's called Ma'arat Tzidkiyahu, okay, the cave of Zedekiah, the last king of Judah. In English, it's called King Solomon's Quarries. Okay, the Arabs also have different names for it. What's the deal? What is this cave? You walk in, it's like this enchanted underground place. You go deep, deep under the ground, under the Muslim quarter. This is a cave that's known already in the time of the Gemara. It's known already 1800 years ago as this massive underground cave. And there was a legend connected to it, which is that when the Babylonians conquer the city of Jerusalem, King Zedekiah, Tzidkiyahu, tries to escape, and he escapes through an underground passageway, a tunnel that takes him all the way out to Jericho. But to no avail, the Babylonians capture him. They kill his two sons. They blind him. And there were those who said, well, maybe this is the cave. It's not the cave because it actually goes into the city as opposed to out of the city, right? It's a dead end deep underneath the Muslim quarter, but it romantically fits with the story. Then there were those who said, well, if you look at the walls, it's clear that this is a quarry. Right? You can see blocks of stone were chiseled out. This is a great 19th century picture. Who's the great builder of Jerusalem? King Solomon. Who are the great admirers of King Solomon? The Freemasons. And here are the Freemasons having their meeting in this cave in the 19th century. But it's not. Okay, King Solomon was a great builder, but he did not build in this technique. This is a much more sophisticated technique. And the quarry is actually, it's a quarry, but it's a quarry from quite a few years after King Solomon, right? It's a quarry from the time of King Herod. All right, Herod, the great builder of Second Temple Jerusalem, he's the one who quarries out this stone. Regardless, this is a very beautiful and fascinating cave. Today they do concerts there, right? All kinds of interesting things. But we are going to finally start walking along Derech Shechem. Okay, now one of the things that I think is the most fascinating about walking on this street is the contrast between the street on the outside, and particularly now, right, when everything's so busy in Ramadan and food sellers selling stuff all over the place, and the courtyards that you go into that are right off of the street, right? The street is like classic 21st century Middle East hawkers and Arabic and yelling and kids. And then suddenly you ring a bell, somebody buzzes you in, and you're in this 19th century European courtyard. Right? It's a fascinating contrast between the two places that are literally one right next to the other. So we are going to go off the street and we are going to go into something called the Paulus House or the Schmidt School, okay, which belonged to the Deutsche Verein Weinheiliger Land, right? The German association in the Holy Land. What are we talking about? We're talking about this fabulous building, and this is where we get again to our crazy architectural styles, right? This is really, the picture doesn't do it justice. You really have to stand outside of Shechem and take a look at this building, this crazy building, which has Eastern elements, it has Western elements. It's a massive, massive building, right? What's the story here? So in the 19th century, the late 19th century, the Germans, like all the others, want to have a place to be, right? And they need a center. And the German Catholics decide that they want to have a school. Okay, the head of the school is somebody named Father Schmidt. Now, it doesn't start out here on Derech. I'm going to show you in a minute where it starts out. Okay, but eventually they realize that they don't have enough space and they don't want to be so far from the old city where they are in their original spot. So in 1899, they buy this plot of land and they build this massive building, which was meant to be a hostel for travelers, a girls' school, a church. Today, it's actually, there is a school next door. And this original, the old building, is used as a very simple but very nice guest house, and people actually come and stay here. But where are the German Catholics before they moved to Derech? They're in somewhere that you wouldn't really expect. And if you walked around in downtown Jerusalem, if you've gone to Hillel Street, right near Nachlat Shiva, right near what today is the Music Square, you will see that there is a building that houses the beautiful Italian synagogue, right? Italian synagogue and the Italian museum. This is part of the story of the Italian community in Jerusalem. Italians who came to Jerusalem, who prayed together, Kiminhag b'nei Roma, as it says on the sign, in the custom of the Jews of Rome. But already during World War II and certainly afterwards, the leaders of the community, right, Umberto Nahon and Casuto and other people, said we have to bring the synagogues that are in Italy, we have to bring them to the land of Israel, because the Jewish communities, first of all, even before the Holocaust, most people left. They went to other places. They went to America. They went to the land of Israel. A lot of beautiful synagogues in the countryside were abandoned. And then certainly with the Holocaust, the problem was compounded. And the Italian community actually manages, with the help, of course, of the state of Israel, to help 2 full synagogues plus a whole lot of synagogue furniture to make Aliyah and to move to Israel. And one of those full synagogues goes into the Israel Museum as an exhibit. One of them, the synagogue of Conegliano Veneto, is put into this building and is used as a synagogue. It's used every Shabbat. People pray there. But this building was not built for that purpose. This was built by Father Schmidt and the German Catholics to house their school. And when they moved to Derech, the building was used for other purposes and eventually was taken over by the Italians. But if you go into the building, besides the Italian museum, if you're very lucky, you can get permission and go into one of the rooms on the first floor, which was a dining room for the Schmidt School with these beautiful, beautiful murals that are still there preserved on the walls. But Schmitz and the school moved to Derech when Kaiser Wilhelm comes to visit in the Holy Land, 1898. It's a very, very big deal for the German community, the German Catholics, the German Protestants who are here. A lot of buildings are dedicated when he comes, right? The Schmidt School is being built at that time as well, the Dormition Church, Augusta Victoria, okay? And it's a very big deal. And this is a room that is dedicated to the Kaiser over here on the left. When the building is finished, okay, it's used as a school, but in World War I, German troops are housed here. You can see the building in the background here, right? This great picture from World War I. When the Germans are defeated and the British take over and the British Mandate begins, the British use it, okay? In the 50s, the Germans come back. And today, like I said, it's a guest house with a school next door. And one of the coolest things about it is you can go up to the roof. And even though it's not very high up, it's only like 4 stories high, you have this unbelievable, unbelievable view, okay? On the one side, you're looking into the old city, and you can literally see all 4 of the quarters. Just point out a couple of things you can see here. You can't do this in the real world, right? So that's kind of neat that you can do it here. All right, this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer. This, of course, is Shechem here, right? Further out, you can come out and see the Churva synagogue, okay, in the Jewish quarter, and not from this perspective, but you can definitely see the Dome of the Rock over here. So you really get a sense of the whole old city from up here. If you look in the other direction, right, if you look to the west, you can see all these buildings that we're talking about, right? You could see Notre Dame of the French over here. Behind them are the Russians. You can't see it so much in this picture, but you can see all of these massive European buildings. And if you look towards the east, you can see the Mount Scopus and the Mount of Olives. So you really have a view to everywhere in the city. It's a great perspective. Okay? And if you come back into the building and you go down to the basement, there are two fascinating exhibits. There's a little museum there. Okay? One of the exhibits is about this gentleman, Conrad Chick. Okay? Conrad Chick is a fascinating character. Okay? He's born in Germany in 1822. Okay? He's a German Protestant on a farm, but he's sickly. He can't really work on the farm. And so in order to make good of himself, he's sent off to Switzerland. And he decides that he's going to study, and he decides that he wants to be a missionary and go to the Holy Land. All right, that's his goal. So he joins up with a group of missionaries. They teach him a very useful trade that will help him to earn his keep in the land of Israel. He learns how to fix cuckoo clocks. Fortunately, he doesn't spend too much time doing that. Right? And then he sets off at age 25 for Jerusalem. And he lives in Jerusalem for the next more than 50 years. Okay, he dies in 1901. Now he comes here. He remains a devout Christian his whole life, and he remains associated with the church. But he quickly leaves behind missionizing, and he moves to his new love, which is the city of Jerusalem. Okay? And he falls in love with Jerusalem and everything about Jerusalem. And he essentially teaches himself all sorts of things. He teaches himself architecture. He teaches himself urban planning. Okay, this devout Christian is the guy who plans the neighborhood of Mea Sha'arim. He teaches himself surveying and model making, and he teaches himself archaeology. And he's just fascinated by absolutely everything that happens in Jerusalem. And everything that happens in Jerusalem in the next 55 years, he is somehow involved in it. He goes, he checks out new archaeological discoveries, he writes about them, he's connected to the Jewish communities and the Christian communities and even the Muslim communities. And this is a picture on the right here. The Muslims want to have a precise model. Models are a big deal in the 19th century. They want a model of the Temple Mount and Al-Aqsa and of the Dome of the Rock, and they hire him to do it. And they allow him, even though he's not a Muslim, access to all sorts of secret underground chambers on the Temple Mount so that he can build this model. So he really gets to see things that lots of other non-Muslims were never able to see, but he really is a champion of Jerusalem. When he finally makes himself a little money, he builds himself a house on the Street of the Prophets on Rehov HaNevi'im called Beit Tavor, beautiful house, right? But he has left behind a great legacy in Yerushalayim. The other really quirky exhibit down on the bottom floor is about a different head of the school. We said Father Schmidt started the school. There's another head of the school comes along a little after him. It's a little confusing. His name is Father Schmitz. Okay, they're very similar. Father Schmitz comes, right? Obviously, he's a priest. And he comes to Jerusalem to head up the school, but he really is a naturalist. He loves animals. He's fascinated by animals, and he, in his spare time, basically goes out looking for the animals of the land of Israel. Now, remember that this is the 19th, early 20th century. So when we say loves animals, loving animals often means loving them from behind the barrel of a gun. Okay? He shoots a lot of animals. And he shoots a lot of animals, which is a terrible thing on the one hand. On the other hand, they would have been shot by somebody. And he actually takes them back and has them taxidermied and has them stuffed and has them classified. And a lot of animals that would have completely disappeared from the world, right? The last crocodile and the last leopard, right? All these animals which were almost extinct in the land of Israel already, he actually manages to preserve them, okay? And he brings them back. It's different than our view of preservation, but okay. He brings them back to the Schmidt School, and he has them taxidermied, and he creates this incredible collection. But he dies, and the collection sort of fades away. Like people forget about it. Nobody really knows where it is, what happens to it. Ultimately, the priests put it into a storeroom and it's forgotten about. Fast forward to the 80s, and there's a naturalist and an ornithologist named Yossi Leshem who has heard about this collection, but he can't find it anywhere. And he's looking, he looks all over the old city. He's looking everywhere until somebody calls him and says, you know, I was in the Schmidt School and you should really go there because there's a storeroom that has all these taxidermied animals. And he runs over there, right, and he finds his collection, which is not in great shape because it's been sitting in a storeroom for, more than half a century. And he manages to convince the fathers to let him have it taken and restored. And today, it's actually, some of it is still in Schmidt House, but a lot of it was brought to the new and absolutely gorgeous Natural History Museum in Tel Aviv. If you go to the Steinhardt Natural History Museum on the campus of Tel Aviv University, you go, it's a beautiful, beautiful museum. And if you go up to one of the top floors, they have this cabinet, which you're looking at here on the right, which shows you Father Schmidt's collection, right? Here's the Tanin Yaor, the crocodile over here, right? All kinds of fascinating things. Okay, so we're going to leave Schmidt School behind and we're going to keep walking up the street. And we come to a little alleyway, an alleyway that's actually named after Conrad Chick. And it has on it a sign that says the Garden Tomb. And we walk down the alleyway, and after you get, permission to go in, you come into this beautiful pastoral green area where you'll see a lot of Christian groups walking around, singing hymns, praying, reading from the Bible. What's the story here? So if you go to the edge of the garden and you look out, right next door to the garden is this weird looking outcropping of rock, right? You guys can see it here. Now, this outcropping of rock was noticed by quite a few people in the mid-19th century. One of them was this strange British fellow called Charles Gordon. And he and others said, you know what this looks like? This looks like a skull. Here are the eyes. Here's the nose. Here's the head. This looks like a skull. Now, what is a skull in Hebrew? A gulgolet. What is a skull in Aramaic? A Golgotha. Okay, Golgotha is in the New Testament the place where Jesus is crucified, right? Golgotha, Gulgolet. And Gordon finds out that right next door to these weird rocks, there actually are some very ancient tombs. And he says, this is the hill, Skull Hill, Golgotha, where Jesus is crucified. And right next door to it is the place where he was buried, because there are ancient tombs here. Now, this goes against centuries upon centuries upon centuries of Christian tradition that puts the crucifixion and the burial in the heart of Jerusalem, in the Christian quarter, in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But the Protestants don't care about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and they believe that this is the spot, right? And if you go in, you can see that deep inside the garden, there are indeed these ancient tombs. And you say, this is very interesting, because here you have this rock. It's on a high place. You're on a main road, right? Remember, we said this is part of that road, that Derech, the path of the patriarchs. The Romans love to crucify people on roads because everybody gets to see it. This seems to fit very nicely with the story. There's only one little catch, okay? The graves here are indeed very old. They are about 500 years older than the time of Jesus. They're not Second Temple period graves. They're First Temple period graves. And we're going to see that literally next door, there are even more. And this is clearly a burial place from First Temple times, from 2,600 years ago, and not from 2,000 years ago. So it's not Jesus's grave. It's somebody's grave, but it's not Jesus's grave. Now, there are Protestants who understand that the archaeology shows that this is not from the first century of the Common Era. There are others, but they come here because it's beautiful and it's pastoral, and they feel that it's a proper place to come and pray. There are others who cling to this belief that this really is the right place. But in any case, it's a fascinating place to come and see, but it's much more likely that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is actually the real place where the story takes place. But if we want to understand the story of the Garden Tomb, we have to walk literally a half a block away Okay, and we go into yet another Christian compound. Okay, and in this case, it's the Dominicans. Okay, Dominicans, the French, okay, French Catholics who have built a church called Saint-Etienne or Saint Stephen. Now, what's the connection to the Garden Tomb? We'll see in a minute. But first of all, who's Saint Stephen? What is this place? Okay, already in the New Testament, there's somebody who is killed for his belief in Jesus, not Jesus who's crucified, but a follower of Jesus. The Romans martyr because they look down on Christianity. And this is a guy named Stephen. He is the first martyr in Christianity. He's stoned probably, well, it could be here. There's another tradition that it's near what you see here in the picture, Lion's Gate, which is also known as St. Stephen's Gate. And there was a church here as well. But in this area where we are, where the Dominicans built their church in the 19th century, they actually found remnants of a church that goes back 1500 years earlier to Byzantine times. And it might be that this is the original commemoration of this story. Regardless, the Dominicans, the French, they come here in 1900. They decide they want to be here also on Derech Shechem. Right? They build themselves a church. But what's interesting about them is that they are scholars and they start a school called the École Biblique. Okay, the École Biblique, the School of Bible Studies. They're actually involved with the whole story of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the excavations in Qumran. They're very involved in biblical archaeology. Some of the great names of biblical archaeology, right? Vincent and Deveau and Roland Deveau and Abel. Okay, a lot of these big guys. And their library, the École Biblique, is still considered to be one of the great archaeological libraries in Jerusalem. Interestingly enough, okay, they were fascinated by Hebrew, of course, because, how can you understand Tanakh without Hebrew? And they made friends with Eliezer ben Yehuda, right, the renewer of Hebrew. And he would come to the library to use their books, and they would come to him and they would ask him their questions about Hebrew. And there was like a nice relationship between them. And when he died, the Dominican friars came to pay a shiva call at Eliezer ben Yehuda's house. So that's just a little unusual, okay? But they decide that they want to build a crypt, right? A burial place on the grounds of Saint-Etienne for the friars who lived there and who died there. And they dig down and they build a burial chapel, right? But when they do, they discover something very strange. We'll come back to this map in a second. They discover that right where they have built their crypt, someone else had the same idea only thousands of years earlier. They find an ancient burial cave. Okay, and this is where we connect to the Garden Tomb, because this burial cave also First Temple times. Okay, so we'll come back to this in 1 second. Let's go back to what did the city look like in First Temple times. Okay, so if you take a look at this map, okay, this is a map of Jerusalem at the end of First Temple times. Okay, when the city includes the city of David, includes the Temple Mount, and goes all the way across towards Jaffa Gate and down. Where are we in this map? We're all the way out here, right? We're out in the middle of nowhere, okay? People are not buried in the city. Okay, we have the issues of purity and impurity. Jews don't bury in the city, they bury outside, but they don't bury far outside. Okay? They bury just outside. So here we have a tomb that was found here. What today is the old city, but in those days was not, and a tomb here. But we are talking about the tombs out here to the north. We also have tombs over here in the Kidron Valley, right? On the east, we have tombs in the south by the Hinnom Valley. But this is another cluster of tombs up here in the north. As the city expands, right, they move in this direction. And we have a whole cluster of tombs up here. Now, this is one of those tombs. How did people bury in First Temple times? Basically, what they did is they laid the bodies out in a family tomb. By the way, this is only very few people. Right? Most people are buried in a field somewhere because they don't have any money. This is what we call the 1%, right? The wealthy people. The wealthy people could afford to have a family tomb. And what they would do is they would lay the bodies out on a shelf. The bodies would decompose. And you can actually see this in the picture here. You can see in the back, I hope, the shelves. And once the bodies have decomposed, the bones were put into a storage place, a ma'asefah, where you would put everybody's bones together. together. And that's why the classic phrase about death in the Bible is he's gathered onto his fathers. Vayesaf el avotav. Literally, right? Literally, everybody gets put together. Second Temple times, things start to change and you have more individual burial. But First Temple times, if you're finding these shelves, if you're finding this ma'asefah, and perhaps most importantly, certain architectural details that are found here, this is telling you these are graves from First Temple times. Take a look at what they look like. This is one of the nicest First Temple tombs that has ever been discovered, right? So here's the chapel. Right. And then they discovered behind it, you go in, you can go into it, right? You get permission, you can go in. It's amazing. Right. And you have this chamber in the middle, okay, like an entranceway. Usually it's a little bit lower so that people don't bump their heads. And then off of the chamber, you have 6 rooms, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, well, actually 7, because we want to count this inner room. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, in each one of these rooms, except for this one, which may have been like a preparation room, what do you have? You have a shelf and another shelf and another shelf, okay, where you have room to lay out 4 bodies, right? 1 on either side and 2 in the one in the back, so that you really have plenty of space, because these bodies are only laid out for about a year, and after a year the bones are gathered and they're put away. What's this one in the back here? The one in the back here seems to be a special one. It doesn't have a masefah. It doesn't have a place for bones. We think this might have been for like the patriarch of the family, who's just kind of laid out in state and who's left there in a sarcophagus. But it's a fascinating view into what things might have looked like for a wealthy family in First Temple times. How did they bury people? How did their homes look? Because there are a lot of architectural details in the graves that probably echoed what the houses look like, right? And it also tells us that we're outside the city, because you wouldn't have graves if you were inside the city, right? So a lot of fascinating details, and this is definitely one of the most unusual things on Derech Shechem. By the way, the fathers discovered this in the early 70s. Okay, now they think it's a Second Temple period crypt. They don't think it's First Temple. And there are 2 young soldiers. One is named Gabi Barkai, and one is named Amos Kloner. They become very venerable and important archaeologists. Gabi Barkai becomes the guy who knows about burial in Jerusalem. And they hear about this, right? They're soldiers. They're on leave. This is 1970. And what does a soldier do on leave? Well, most guys go home and have a nice meal and see their girlfriends. These guys go to see the tomb. Okay, because the tomb, that's what we want to see. And they manage to finagle their way in, and they get permission from the fathers to go and see it. And they say to them, you know, this is a First Temple tomb. And they say, oh, you're very cute, but we know better. We are biblical scholars. This is a Second Temple tomb. But pretty much everybody agrees today that this is First Temple, going back about 2,600 years. So really, it's an unbelievable find underneath St.Etienne. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Okay, one more thing about the graves. Okay, so other graves that were discovered, not here, but this is in the southwestern part of the city, okay, right across from Mount Zion, right near what's the Begin Center today. There are other graves, same time period, that were discovered, not as perfect as these. The cave, the underground chamber was not preserved, but we do have this place here, this nice tourist is demonstrating, where you can lay out the bodies. There's a little headrest, right? There's plenty of space here. Now, this, like I said, not as well preserved, but it contains a treasure that was not found in Saint-Etienne. This is an amazing thing. Most people, all people who were buried in these kinds of elaborate graves were buried with stuff. Right? People say, oh, Jews didn't do that. No, Jews, just like everybody else in the ancient world, buried with stuff. You don't know what the journey to the afterlife is going to be like. Pottery, jewelry, amulets, all kinds of stuff. However, archaeologists don't usually find this stuff because grave robbers know about it before anybody else, right? And people would put up signs and curses, don't steal, don't break into the grave. It didn't help. Graves were almost always broken into. But these graves in Ketef Hinnom, right, in the southwest of Jerusalem, they were excavated by the same Gabi Barkai, okay? About 10 years later, he's no longer a young soldier. Now he's a young archaeologist. And he was excavating these graves. And one day he had a group of students who came to help him, like grade school students. And one kid was a big pest. And so he says, you go dig far away from me. And he's digging and he's talking, and he's teaching, and this kid comes back. I want to show you something, Professor Barkai, I have to show you something. And he opens up his hand and he shows him 2 clumps of dirt and inside 2 tiny pieces of silver. Now, on the one hand, Barkai is ecstatic. On the other hand, he's apoplectic. What are you doing wrecking the dig site, grabbing stuff like that? But they went over and the kid says to him, look, I went to dig where you told me, and I saw there was a little opening. So I crawled into it and I fell into another cave. Right? There was a cave below the cave that was exposed to everybody. There was another cave that nobody had found that was filled with stuff, right? All kinds of things. After they cleaned it out, it was very exciting. It had bones, it had pottery, it had jewelry. But the most exciting thing were those first 2 pieces of silver. Okay, those rolled up pieces of silver, and they unrolled them very painstakingly, and they had ancient Hebrew letters written on them. Okay? And on one of them, including other things, it said, Yivarechacha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha, v'yasem lecha shalom. Almost the entire text of the Birkat Kohanim, of the priestly blessing that we have in the book of Numbers in Sefer Bamidbar. This was an amazing, amazing discovery. This is the oldest Torah text that we have, and it was found in a grave. So we didn't find such a thing in St.Etienne, even though it's an amazing grave, but graves can yield, if you're very lucky, incredible treasure. Let's talk a little about the 6-Day War, because it is, after all, Yom Yerushalayim. Okay. On the 2nd day of the war, okay, on the night between the 1st day and the 2nd day of the war, the paratroopers take Ammunition Hill. Okay, this was a very heavily fortified Jordanian position right next to the border. The army understands that in order to go further into Jordanian territory, which they weren't planning on doing, by the way. We know that Israel felt very, very threatened in the 6-Day War. It was not at all clear that it was going to be a triumphant ending like we know today. They make plans to take out the Egyptian Air Force, this incredibly daring raid on the first morning of the war, but they also secretly open up channels to Hussein, king of Jordan, asking him not to open up a front in Jerusalem. And Hussein doesn't follow through, and he does. He attacks on the first morning of the war. And unlike Egypt, which is far down in the desert, Jordan is literally across the street. So the war begins in Jerusalem. That first night between the 1st day and the 2nd day, they take Ammunition Hill with many casualties. And from that point, they want to be moving east, right? North and east, to link up to the Israeli position on Mount Scopus. Okay, Mount Scopus was under Israeli control, even though it was deep in Jordanian territory, and they start to move in that direction. And there are 3 different groups of paratroopers. One of them takes Ammunition Hill, one of them goes through Wadi Joz and up the Mount of Olives, and one of them, the 28th Battalion, okay, is supposed to go through the area of the American colony in Sheikh Jarrah towards the Rockefeller Center, but towards Rockefeller Museum. Only what happens? They take a wrong turn, and I'm going to show you the map in a minute, but realize that this is 19 years that this side of the city has been in Jordanian hands. How old are soldiers? 19, 20, the commander is maybe 23, right? The only thing they can rely on to navigate are intelligence, old maps, and it's dark and it's confusing and they've never been here before. And it's very understandable that they take a wrong turn, right? Instead of going on the very lightly defended Salah ad-Din Road, and even today, these roads, right, they meet, there's a fork, and it's easy to get confused. Instead of going on Salah ad-Din Road, which was lightly defended, and making their way from there to Rockefeller, they take a wrong turn and they go on our road on Derech Shechem. And there they hit a hidden Jordanian legionnaire position. There's a fierce battle. 8 soldiers are killed, right? It's a very terrible story. And today, when you go on Derech Shechem, there's a memorial to this 28th Battalion, right? That's what we saw here, to the paratroopers who fell not only here, but all the ones from the battalion who fell in the Six-Day War. It's very much in the middle of nowhere, this memorial. It's right near a gas station. It's a little bit sad how modest it is, but people who know about it, and who want to follow in the footsteps of the paratroopers will remember this story. Now, as you continue on, right, we're going to come to our last few stories here. We've talked about graves, we've talked about the city and how this was outside the city at a certain point, but towards the end of Second Temple times, we're actually still in the city. The city grows and expands. And right in the courtyard of a gas station, it's kind of a funny place, is a piece of what's called the third wall, right? This wall here that's at the very end of Second Temple times. The city grows beyond the wall of the city today, right? This is today's old city wall, okay? This is how big it was at the end of Second Temple times. And we have a little piece of this third wall, okay? And that's what we're gonna see in a second, okay? And it doesn't look very impressive, but it's kind of neat to know that it's there in the courtyard of a gas station, very Jerusalem, right? Where would you put priceless archaeological memories of the past? In the courtyard of the gas station. It's a little bit odd, but there it is. And the street right next to it is called the Third Wall Street, Rehov HaChoma HaShlishit. Okay, so Jerusalem grows, expands, and this is the limits of it until we get to the 19th century, the late 19th century. As we continue along Derech Shechem, again, one of those moments where you look up and you say, wait a second, did I just like get on a plane and, not even use my passport? Because here we are looking into this very British enclave, right? It looks like Oxford, it looks like Cambridge. It's actually supposed to look like New College in Oxford. And this is St. George. This is one of the British centers in Jerusalem. There's more than one, but this is one of them. It's Protestant, obviously, the United Protestant Bishopry, and they build it with this bell tower, very elaborate, and this enormous church. But one of the things that's fascinating about the Protestants, right, the British who come here, not only the British, but primarily, they are part of something called the London Society for the Promotion of Christianity Among the Jews. Lots of missionizing. The goal is to bring the Jews back to Christianity so that the second coming can happen. And actually, the very first bishop of Jerusalem, the first Anglican bishop, take a look at the list here, is somebody named Michael Solomon Alexander, who in his former life was known as Rav Shlomo Alexander. He was an Eastern European Jew, came to England, converted to Christianity, and actually becomes the first Anglican bishop of Jerusalem. And they come here and they throw themselves into creating services for the Jews who are here, right? Trade schools and orphanages and hospitals, in order to convince them to convert. What happens? It backfires. Right? It backfires because instead of the Jews using these institutions, which they know they're going to be expelled from the faith, they're going to be put into cherem, they start to build their own institutions. So the Christians actually push the Jews, who are very fractious, to overcome their differences and to build on their own. Okay, and the second to final place we're going to stop is this strange place which has a big French flag flying from it. It's called the Tombeau des Rois, and it's part of the République Française, as you can see in the sign. And only very recently, by the way, did they start allowing people to come in. It was off limits for a very long time. What is this? This is a very elaborate grave that was discovered in the 1870s. And we didn't know who it was, right? It's discovered and eventually bought by a French family who gives it over to the French government, right? Kind of crazy, but that's what they do. And that's why the French government is in charge of it today. Now, whose grave is this? Very large, very elaborate. When it was first discovered, it was called the Tomb of the Kings, because they figured, who's going to build such an elaborate grave? If not King David, King Solomon. But as we learned more about archaeology and as we looked at it more carefully, it became very clear that this is not First Temple stuff, but Second Temple stuff. And this fits with everything we've been talking about, all these graves outside the city, but still doesn't tell us who this is. So in Jewish tradition, this was the grave of Kalba Savua, right? The very wealthy philanthropist of Jerusalem, or Nakdimon Ben Gurion, another very wealthy philanthropist. But then they discovered a sarcophagus, very plain, but very beautiful. And on it, written in Hebrew letters, right, and also written in another language called Tadmori, it says Tzada Malketa, Queen Tzada. Who is this queen, right? Who's this lady? Who is a queen who would have been wealthy and powerful enough to build herself such a fabulous tomb? Now, today we think it's Queen Helene, right? Queen Helene of Adiabene, a woman who converted to Judaism. She appears in a lot of different places in the Mishnah and the Gemara. Helene Hamalka, she builds a fabulous sukkah. She provides for the poor of Jerusalem. Very interesting character. And Josephus tells us that she's buried in Jerusalem, and it seems that this is her grave. Okay, two last very short things. Muslim building outside the walls. Okay, so we said that the Muslims build themselves fabulous villas. One of them is this house, the Al-Husseini house. The Husseini family were in this area, as well as in Sheikh Jarrah, a little bit further to the north. This is built as a private house, very fabulous house. Eventually it becomes a hotel. And in the 90s, people who've lived in Jerusalem for a while or are news junkies may recall this picture, what this looks like, because this was Orient House. Right? This was the Palestinian headquarters in Jerusalem. This is where the Oslo talks were. This was on the news all the time in the 90s. And it's exemplary of this story of these important Arab families building themselves some fabulous villa outside the city, but eventually it becomes part of the larger Arab cause. And the final fabulous villa is the American Colony Hotel, right? When you get to the end of the street, you get to the end of Derech Shechem, you come to this very exclusive, very beautiful, very not Jewish hotel. A lot of foreign journalists stay here. Gorgeous courtyards and just really elaborate and gorgeous, but it's the same story, okay? This was another part of the Husseini family. Rabbi Effendi al-Husseini is one of the first houses in the 1860s. He happens to have 4 wives. He doesn't want any trouble between them. So he builds a large enough compound that each wife gets her own little house, right? And this is his huge, beautiful compound. Where does the American part come in? In the 1880s, you have American Christians from Chicago, okay, the Spafford family, who have suffered a lot of misfortune and disaster. They create a new sect. They call it the Overcomers. They move to Jerusalem. They do good deeds. They do good works. They work with the people here. And eventually, they spread out enough that they need a compound. And they buy this hotel and they move in. And eventually they turn it into a hotel. So there's so many different stories along the way on Derech Shechem. I see there are a lot of comments in the chat. So let's see if any of them are things that I can answer or talk about. Let's see. All right, this is okay. Did the child become an archaeologist? Who are we talking about? That was
who found the 2 silver things.
Oh yeah, so there's an end to that story. I didn't tell because we were a little pressed for time, but there's a great end to that story. Okay, which is that about 10 years later, Gabi Barkai was guiding a group of soldiers in the Israel Museum, and this had been put on display. And he's telling the story, and he's telling about this nudnik kid. And one handsome, tall soldier in the back raises his hand. He says, "That was me," right? And this is a story that people have heard from Gabi Barkai, and it's definitely is a true story. So I don't know if he became an archaeologist, but he made good. He made good in the world. Thank you. You're welcome. Recording. I don't know. Deborah will answer the recording question. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Will it be done in person? Be'ezrat Hashem, we are already, by the way, I don't know if Deborah wants to announce it. We are doing a real tour at the end of the month, not this one, but other ones. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you. No, I think that's it. So I don't know if you guys want to make announcements or.
I want to thank you, Shulie, and we want to thank Yardeana and David and Shulie for this incredible program. As Shulie mentioned, if you liked hearing Shulie virtually, in person, she's even more incredible. On May 26th, there's going to be a tour called From Agron Street to Mamilla. You can contact Deborah for more information May 26th in the morning for those with a Tav Yarok and who are in Israel. Lastly, just want to thank, most importantly, the Osband family, Barbara and her children, for sponsoring this beautiful event and other Yom Yerushalayim events that have led up to today in memory of Dr. Michael Evan Osband, Zichrono Livracha. We want to, really thank the entire family for joining together and doing this in his memory, in Michael Osband's memory. It's a really wonderful way to honor a loved one, and we're very appreciative. If for those of you who are interested in future programs, keep track of what we're offering. We have some incredible programs coming out of Pardes. We're right now in the middle of the Omer series as part of the community education program. And we have lots of other things happening this summer, including the Pardes Learning Seminar and the Pardes Summer Program, both of which are happening online. Please visit our website for more info, and thank you everyone for being here today.